Hello and welcome to the ACPA and ASHE Presidential Symposium, Leading in Higher Education, Reimagining Our Spaces and Places. My name is Tricia Fechter-Gates and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I serve as the Deputy Executive Director of ACPA College Student Educators International.
And hello, my name is Jason Gilbo with the Association for the Study of Higher Education, better known as ASHE, and I use he, him pronouns. We're so glad you all could join us today, and we're really excited for our time together with you and the really fantastic panelists who will share with you today. The Presidential Symposium will be recorded. You probably all got the notification. Will be recorded and will be shared with registrants by email within 1 week. We have cart services for today's webinar provided by a live captioner. To access the live captioning, select the closed captioning icon on the bottom of your Zoom window.
We would like to begin our time together with a land acknowledgement. ACPA College Student Educators International particularly acknowledges and recognizes that the land upon which our international headquarters is located today has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst a number of Indigenous people, including the Accohannock, Pocomoke, Piscataway, Anacostank, Mattapenient, Nangumek, Pamunkey, Tahihent, Nanticook, Chickahominy, Monacan, Mattaponi, Nansemond, Rappahannock, Ani, Stohini, Unami, and Asutiig tribal nations as the original occupants of the Washington, D.C. region.
The ASHE office sits on the unceded land of the Southern Paiute. Descendants of the Tudinu are desert people who have lived along the Colorado River since 1100 AD and extended north and west into the areas known today as Southern Nevada, Utah, and California. ASHE also acknowledges that the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and members of the UNLV and ASHE communities have and continue to benefit from the use of Southern Paiute land. Related to our missions of supporting and fostering learning through the generation and sharing of knowledge, ACPA, College Student Educators International, and ASHE acknowledges the painful history of genocide for Native, Aboriginal, and Indigenous peoples. We honor and respect the many and diverse tribal nations and people who were forcefully removed from, as well as those who still are connected to, the land we are all joining from virtually today.
We strongly advocate for higher education and student affairs professionals to honor the land, the original tribal occupants, and the history of the place where you are located. We encourage all of today's attendees to learn and reflect on the history of and contemporary place where you are joining from today. Further, we have a responsibility to continually self-educate, reflect, and listen to the histories and people in our areas, including tribal land acknowledgements in practice. And understanding and acknowledging history is not only respectful and educational, it is the justice-oriented advocacy necessary for continuing the work of dismantling the devastating effects of settler colonialism in our society.
As we begin this session, I would like to offer an overview of the Zoom platform we'll be using today. As I've mentioned previously, this webinar is both captioned and recorded. If you would like to access the live captioning, please select the closed captioning icon in your Zoom menu bar. We invite you throughout this session to ask questions and contribute comments by selecting the Q&A option on the bottom of your Zoom window or in your menu bar. You can enter your questions and comments to share with the panelists. We'll address many of these questions and comments as we can during our time together. We also encourage you to engage in the chat window, which I see in the corner of my eye is already very active, so thanks for introducing yourselves. But if you haven't had a chance to engage there yet, you can click the chat option in your Zoom menu bar. We know this is going to be a very active chat as already evidenced, so our panelists really won't be monitoring the chat. If you have a question or comment for them, please use the Q&A function. We also invite you to tweet along using hashtag #PresSymposium, that's Pres with a Z, to continue the conversation with other attendees during and after this event. Our panelists' Twitter handles are also included in the workbook that you receive via email. And speaking of your attendee workbook, we encourage you to have that available throughout the symposium to guide your experience, to take notes, to review the resources that the panelists have provided, and to do your work to prepare compelling change and write your own story. This session will emphasize the importance of that now more than ever.
For our agenda for our time together, in a moment, we will be welcomed by ACPA President Danielle Morgan Acosta and ASHE President DL Stewart. Next, they will engage 4 higher education scholars, practitioners, and leaders in paired conversations. After the conversations, you will have some time to participate in a guided activity, writing your own story of higher education. When it is time for that activity, you will find the guiding questions and prompts in your attendee workbook. Lastly, we'll have a closing panel discussion where our panelists will reflect on the paired conversations today and together discuss how we can write our story during these times of change. With that, we would like to thank you again for joining us, and we are excited to introduce ACPA President Danielle Morgan Acosta and ASHE President DL Stewart.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason and Tricia. Hi, everybody. I am Danielle Morgan Acosta, she, her pronouns. I currently serve as the Associate Dean of Students for Student Engagement at Clark University and ACPA President. And I am coming to you today from the ancestral lands of the Nipmuc people. I woke up this first chilly, brisk fall morning here in central Massachusetts with such joy to be in community with all of you, to soak in the knowledge and wisdom from our panelists, and to center and invest in ourselves for these few hours on this first Friday in October. And I just, before I turn it over to DL, want to begin with just immense gratitude for Jason and Tricia and Chris and all the teams that have been working to get us here all together, for all of you who are joining us. And shout out to some campuses that I've worked at or gone to school at, and for all of our panelists, and for DL for this joint opportunity to be in work in space with you in this way. ACPA, for those that don't know, is a professional higher education association in my professional home. We're building towards almost 100 years of boldly transforming higher education through volunteer leaders, creating and sharing influential scholarship, shaping critically reflective practice, and advocating for equitable and inclusive environments. And almost 5 years ago, ACPA released the Strategic Imperative for Racial Justice and Decolonization, a bold vision for our association, for higher education, and our world that centers love in the possibilities to imagine a more just world, and provides us resources to dismantle oppression at the individual, group, and system levels.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm DL Stewart. My pronouns are he, him, his, and they, them, their. I am currently professor and chair of the Department of Higher Education in the Moorgridge College of Education at the University of Denver. And I am this year's president of the Association for the Study of Higher Education. It's my honor and my pleasure really to be here and to be in conversation with these wonderful people that we'll be able to hear from. Scholars, as Danielle said, scholars, practitioners, leaders in our fields. ASHE is, for those who are not aware, ASHE is a scholarly association of more than 2,000 members who are dedicated to the study of higher education as a field. And it's very meta. Many of us work in colleges and universities or are college and university adjacent, and we study colleges and universities and the systems and structures in which they engage and are a part of through policy practice and scholarship and research. So in this conversation, it's, I think, critically important to consider where we are in this moment. And for me in this moment, I am sitting in Denver, Colorado, which is the ancestral and present day homelands of several indigenous peoples, including the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and Ute Mountain peoples. It is important for us to consider that this moment that we're in today, in this quarter, this term, this semester, feels in many ways probably very similar to the moment we would have been in at this time last year. And so what do we need to know? What do we need to hear to carry us not just through this moment, to help us reflect on the past moments and to take us forward into what's next? So with that said, I'm excited to kick us off here in conversation with Eileen Galvez, who will be coming on here. And I'll ask her to not just introduce herself, but to tell us what speaks to your soul and what brings you to this day in this moment.
First of all, let me start by saying what an honor it is to be here with you, Dr. Stewart, Dr. Morgan Acosta, the amazing staff of ACPA and ASHE, and of course, the incredibly wise participants that we will all learn from today. My name is Eileen Galvez. I use she and /eo pronouns. I currently reside on the ancestral homelands of the Quinnipiac. I am the daughter of displaced immigrant refugees from a war funded by US Empire. Our homelands are in the Isthmus of Central America, specifically El Salvador. I am also a sister, an auntie, a partner, and a loyal friend. I share life with others through chisme, laughter, binging on podcasts, and sharing my not so hot takes with others, and also in seeking liberations that are intrinsically tied to each other's.
Thank you so much. I love that. I love the fullness of life that you brought into that introduction, of life and of heart. As we think about, you and I have been talking a bit about the colonial university and the ways that the university functions as an instrument of colonialism, right? In particular as it operates here in the United States, right? And so what does it mean to you to talk about and to understand the colonial university?
Yeah, you know, that question in itself is really interesting because it really took me being, let me see, an undergraduate, a master's student, a practitioner, and then finally diving into my own scholarship for me to actually even realize that I was deeply in a colonial environment. And it has been an unlayering for me as a settler for what Indigenous people have known for many lifetimes, right? And that is that colleges and universities are colonial spaces. Now, what do I mean by that? When I think about all the institutions that I have been a part of, I believe that they actually all have land acknowledgements today, similar to what was shared earlier. And it has sort of become this ritual to state before events and meetings, and naming those lands are really important, but it also opens a door to further questions that those of us that are settlers have not had to think about because we don't have a direct connection to these lands. And so, for example, for me, some of those questions have been, okay, here's a land acknowledgement, and what are the histories of how these buildings came to be on these Indigenous lands? Or how is it institution in relation to the original stewards of said lands? There's this book, A Third University is Possible. It's a tiny book. I started reading this in my doctoral program, and I come back to it often. But in here, the reason why I come back to it often is that in here, LePaperson, the author, compares the university to a machine with colonial desires. And within that machine are agents that have the capacity to retool the machine from the inside. Now, the university has not returned those indigenous lands. Students are trained to be researchers with methods that have historically extracted knowledges from indigenous, Black, and other peoples of color. A fraction of those students will then turn and become full-time researchers. And many of those will be called experts on the experiences of groups outside themselves. These are all colonial activities. Now, I want to replace the metaphor of the machine used in the book with networks. The same networks that allow us all to be here together and connecting virtually from all over the globe. As the university grows its research, its endowments, it is increasing their network connectivities. And those researchers, they are replicating themselves with colonial instructions. This is actually quite similar to what Dr. Sophia Noble, who actually was just named a MacArthur Genius, what she calls the algorithms of oppression. And in her research, Dr. Noble looked at the great networks of Google and other search engines. And when she searched for Black women, the results provided were misrepresentations of Black women or stereotypes established by the colonial network. The more she researched, the more she found misrepresentations of other already marginalized groups. And specifically, women of color across the board were depicted as sexual objects, and their faces were not the ones that popped up when she searched the term beautiful. So within these networks that have been lauded to provide access to information to millions, if not billions of people, they have algorithms that frame women of color in demeaning ways. Their bodies neatly packaged in a search result for sexual consumption, but of course denied of such a concept such as beauty. So the university, like the networks, while they may be presented as neutral, right? They have been established with colonial algorithms. How many of us have used Google to search ideas for our work in student affairs? How many of us have used Google Scholar to help us in our research? I probably use it every single day to ask multiple questions, and then I'm really creeped out when it like knows things that it shouldn't know because I didn't put it in there, right? So even within the colonial university, we are also introducing outside networks that perpetuate colonial desires. And what makes it so insidious is that you and I and everyone participating here today, we are all agents functioning within the colonial university.
Thank you, Eileen. I think that's really powerful to consider, right? And really let that kind of seep into our bones, into our spirits, that we are participants, as you said, in these networks, right? And so I wonder, is it possible for the colonial university to make space for humanity? And how might that happen?
So the paper talked about those agents, remember? Now let's replace that with malware. Being connected to the network of the colonial university also means that we have both the capacity to replicate those colonial instructions, or we can be the malware that attacks it. Control, Alt, delete the mess out of it. We can acknowledge the lands we are on, and we can dedicate time, space, and resources to center Indigenous communities, create greater access for their youth. We can work on identifying the families whose Black ancestors were kidnapped to build our institutions. We can use malware to recode the network with humility and the ability to say, I am sorry, I did X harm to you and to others, and I want to restore your trust in our relationship. That will take time, I know, and you don't have to accept my apology. But I will do the self-work that I need to do so as not to continue perpetuating that harm. You know, when I think about my educational training to be a student affairs practitioner, I don't think we actually ever had a conversation on how to apologize, how to admit that we were wrong, which is kind of silly, right? Because we are taught to facilitate conversations between students apologizing to other students. And also, we are all flawed people, but there's this pressure to fit the mold of a professional that doesn't make space for our personal human traits. I also believe that we all have like this deep desire to be seen as good people. And that often gets in the way of admitting that we can both work on being good people and commit harm. And while we function within the colonial university, I do believe that we can be the malware to introduce humility to the network. But that work really starts with ourselves. So for me, personally, I am a mestiza Latina. I was socialized to be anti-Black and to not recognize Indigenous peoples outside of a colonial holiday. It would be very foolish of me to believe that just because I've done a couple of readings and just because I can quote a couple of Black and Indigenous folks, that all of a sudden I've been cured of that lifetime of socialization. It is a lifetime process. And me being able to admit this out loud allows for me to be held accountable, as I will make mistakes. I will commit harm as much as I don't want to. But I also know that I will continue to work on restoring myself and relationships with others. Now, I can't do that if I shield myself from my own actions or my own beliefs about the mirror inside of myself. So yes, I do believe it is possible to make space for humanity. And ironically, it is a space that we can make by recoding algorithms of the colonial university and working alongside others, uplifting marginalized communities and knowing when you should step back, listen, and learn.
Absolutely. I love that. Step back, listen, and learn, right? Really, and you talked about humility and the need to approach this work, self-work, and the work we do within the university, within these algorithms, these networks, with humility is really important. And you talked about the apologizing. And I think even what comes in correlation to that is the need to acknowledge trauma. So I think about Tricia Shalka's work. She published in the Review of Higher Education in 2019, where she reported findings of how students Black students particularly, were like, can my administrators, can my university just acknowledge the trauma that I'm experiencing right now on this campus and in light of what's happening societally, right? And that goes hand in hand, right? And recognizing that we are required to, by the ethics that we say we are guided by, right? Ethical statements in our associations, ACP and ASHE, talk about ethical responsibilities. And this, if we're gonna really live that out, we have to do what you're talking about. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been great. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation that Danielle is going to lead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eileen. Lots of things for us to think about, some conversation happening in the chat. And as Jasmine kind of comes to join us for this conversation, I just hope that you are all taking a moment to kind of think through how these show up in your world, and hopefully you're spending some time actually disconnected from everything else and making yourself as present as is possible for the next hour and 45 minutes. So Jasmine, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi. So why don't we get started? We've been talking just a bit, let's get you introduced. Share with us, how do you share your life with others, and what is speaking to your soul in this moment?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Jasmine Lee, I use she and her pronouns. I am joining all the way from Baltimore, Maryland, kind of just up the street from the ACPA International Office in some ways, and certainly want to honor the ancestral and present day lands of the Piscataway, Conoy, and Susquehannock peoples. I also want to hold space for the enslaved bodies that were used for work and service across the state of Maryland for over 200 years, and want to be able to evoke their presence into this space as well. Folks have access to my bio, but lately I've been wanting to get a little bit further away from like titles and credentials, and kind of really be connected to who I am as a whole person and to be seen as human. And so I guess today I would like to introduce myself as a daughter, a sister, an aunt. I've got a puppy, so I'm a puppy mom, a friend, a lover of reimagining and co-creating more just and equitable futures. And today in particular, on October 1st, I'm also thinking about my mother who passed away in 2018. Her birthday is on the 10th of this month, October 10th. And she was really committed to celebrating her birthday every single day of the month. And so as today is the beginning of her birthday month, I'm thinking about her and want to honor her in this conversation as well. And when I'm thinking about how I share my life with people, you see that I smile a lot. So this mask thing makes it difficult, but that's how I share my life. Smiles, laughter, joy. On Thursdays, I play kickball, and that is a huge part of my community and my laughter and my joy. And yesterday was our first game of the season. So I woke up this morning just feeling full of life. And thanks for having me.
I love that. Thank you, Jasmine. That's fantastic. As we're building upon the conversation that just happened, we left with these notions of acknowledging trauma. And a lot of the conversations you and I have been having it's also been about love. How does love show up in higher ed, and what does it look like? And so would love for you to share some thinkings that you've been having around that and how it relates to our work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. And what's funny is that I think love is such a taboo word. At some point, we are taught that we shouldn't use it in spaces, right? And so I'm going to pull out my bell hooks here, all about love. I went back to this book when I was thinking about this conversation because Bell argues that the ingredients for love are care, affection, recognition, commitment, trust, honest and open communication, she argues, and affirmation, right? And so it's interesting that love is a taboo word used in educational spaces and workspaces, but those are all things that we need to thrive, right? Like we all need to feel seen and valued. We need to experience care. We need to experience recognition and affection in our workspaces, especially when we're thinking about how these ingredients and how these pieces kind of show up. One of the things that she says in this book is that love is as love does, and that it's an act of will. And so when we're thinking about will, that requires an intention for action. It implies a choice. Right. And so that means we have a choice in how we show up, and that love is not a feeling. It's actually an action. And when we commit to that action, that assumes a responsibility and accountability. Right. And so those are also the pieces that I'm required to think about and navigate as a part of love. And so to me, when I'm thinking about practicing love, because I think if it's an action, then it's going to require daily practice and daily commitment. And so when I'm thinking about practicing love toward my team and toward my students, that means I take responsibility and accountability for the culture that I create in my leadership, for the norms that we cultivate as a community. And it means that I'm committed to this even when it's really difficult. And I know that I have some of my team members on the call today. Thanks for being here. And they know that the past 3.5 weeks have been real rough in Catonsville, Maryland. And so it's especially when it's hard, it's thinking about how we get regrounded in this act of love, especially in a pursuit of equity and a pursuit of justice and a pursuit of cultivating spaces of authenticity for students and for colleagues and for peers. And so I think those are all the things that I've been thinking about in relation to love. And I guess the one other thing I'll say really quickly before I hand it back to you, Danielle, is when I was thinking about love, I was also thinking about how does it feel, right? What does it feel like? And some of my most, I guess, vivid memories of love are when I was in my first professional career at Michigan State. I had gotten a really bad cold, and I was like 26, so full on grown up. And I went to my grandma's house, and she treated me like I was still her little grandbaby, right? Like she stopped everything that she was doing to attend to my needs, to validate my pain, to care for me. And certainly we're not kind of stopping what we're doing at work every single day, but I think about that often because why can't we validate concerns? Why can't we create space to honestly say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not doing well, this is moving too fast for me, right? And so when I think about how love shows up, I think about how we embody it, the same ways that we experience love in our home spaces, in our relationships, and our friendships, in our family relationships, right? We can still embody those same practices in higher education spaces for each other and with each other.
Thanks, Jasmine. I love that, right? Like, what is the feeling, but not only the feeling, the action associated with how love shows up in spaces. You mentioned just the rough pieces that have existed in our world over the past 2 years, but sometimes just every day when we come to campuses, and we've talked about the trauma and how that shows up. And how do we hold on to the action of love and cultivate compassion while also working through and struggling through those things for ourselves and for our staffs and students?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the articles that I referenced in the workbook for today by Dr. Wright-Mayer has this definition for critical compassion pedagogy. And that's kind of what I wanted to ground us in today. And so what she argues along with her students, because she co-created that piece, if you all had a chance to read it, she co-created that piece with her students, which I thought was phenomenal, and which is another practice of love, right? Including people in the process to amplify their voices and their experiences in real time. And so the definition that they place in that piece is that critical compassionate pedagogy seeks to listen, understand, empathize, and take action toward creating more equitable structures in education. And so compassion shows up in our practice of listening generously, right? In our practice, and that's not just listening to what is said, that's listening to what is around, what is beneath, what is behind, what is unsaid, right? That is listening to and creating capacity for people to share their stories, for people to bring their lived experiences into our daily conversations, into our daily actions, and into the decisions that we make on a regular basis. This also means that it's seeking to understand and empathizing and taking action toward a particular type of culture within the spaces that I have influence. So that doesn't mean that I am taking responsibility for things that are outside of my locus of control, but that I am being thoughtful and intentional with the privileges and the positionality that I do have as an institutional administrator to think about how I can require compassion, how I can talk about love, right? And name it in these spaces. In my department, one of our core values and commitments is actually radical love and belonging. That's what we say. It's like on our website, it's on our papers, and all of this kind of stuff. And so we're really committed to kind of bringing this idea of love back into the work that we do. And that gets really difficult when you might be seen as an enemy, right? Or the villain in a story. In particular, I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so because of the structures and the systems that exist in higher education spaces, there are a lot of moments where it gets real hard for me to do the job that I'm literally hired to do, the job that I believe in, because working in DEI spaces oftentimes doesn't actually align with how universities are structured, right? How they've been fundamentally built from the beginning in early college days. And so there are moments where it feels like I'm the villain in the story. There are moments where it feels like I might be the only person carrying the burden, or who actually cares, or what have you. And I think in those spaces, or in those moments too, it's also really important to think about how you reprioritize self-compassion so that you can honor, right, create space to empathize with what's happening for other people, and like hold and create space for you to say, and this is also hard for me, and I am also overwhelmed, and this is also not fair that I'm the one who's the target of the thing that I didn't even do, right? And to like hold space for both of those, that both and approach at the exact same time, because just because this is real doesn't make this other thing less real. And I think sometimes we get into this space where we're so focused on being empathetic that we forget to be self-compassionate. We're so focused on supporting other people that we're not creating space to honor the impact, the very real impact that we're navigating on a regular basis. And so how we, I think, amplify that, recommit to boundaries, and be honest with our staff, with our team, with our students about like, this is real hard. And these are the things I'm trying to do, right? Like, and I'm inviting you to help me in this process and to be patient. But as long as we are not honest with each other, right, then we don't even invite people to empathize with us because we're not being honest with them about the things that we're navigating. And so I think that's what I've been thinking about in regard to compassion fatigue. It's very real. It's very real. And yet it's important to, I think, for me to respond to it, compassion fatigue, with an increased focus on self-compassion.
I love that, giving of love as our students or as our staff are in a place of trauma, but also owning our own trauma and our own frustrations with pieces and the expectations that we might enter into because of where we're working or how we're working or the structures that are in place that we might be trying to work within to break down, but in that moment might not be enough for people, right? How do you manage or support a team? You talked about some things that you do to kind of think through and give yourself compassion and be honest. I'm hearing themes of listening and then, you know, honesty kind of going throughout our conversations. With just a few minutes left, think about for our compassionate leaders that are on the Zoom with us, what are some things they can do to start really setting those boundaries and thinking through how they're showing up and how they're supporting their students and staff and also supporting themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my first response is to take off the cape. In particular, right, I'm thinking about how I show up as a Black woman, and Black women, we do this superwoman thing. Ooh, do we do it, right? And I've had to be really intentional to take off the cape. I have to show up as human, right, and not as superhuman, not as never impacted by harm. And so I think as a leader, it's important to name those things for folks and to share that with my team so that they can also see, right, like how I'm navigating, how I'm carrying things, and also can offer support as needed. I think the other thing too is that we have to be really intentional about creating capacity for pushback, right? This idea around radical candor. I often tell my team, and this is a practice that I've had to like get into because I actually am a control freak normally. And so I've been trying to be really intentional about getting to this space where I say, you know, I might have an opinion on that, but mine doesn't actually matter. Right? Like, I don't actually have to have control over those things anymore. Like, I trust you and you can do it, right? And I think that also helps to shift and refocus on shared responsibility and shared accountability and a shared commitment to how we will practice love together and cultivate love and compassion in the work that we do on a regular basis. And so I still think it's really rooted in authentic and vulnerable relationships. And I think that has to start by modeling as a leader.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for ways that you're helping us think about how love and radical love shows up, and candor and truth and honesty, and how that helps us do the work, but also support those going through trauma and really think about things from different lenses and perspectives. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dia.
Thank you so much. Wow, rich. As we move forward, thank you so much, Jasmine and Danielle, for that conversation. As I come into conversation now with Becky Martinez, I'm gonna ask you to please share with us what's speaking to your soul today in this moment, what brings you into this space with us.
Hi, thanks, DL. Becky Martinez, she, her, and hers. I join you from the land of the Cahuilla and Linseño spaces and occupied land. So I'm currently a guest, which now is known as Hemet, California. I feel like Jasmine set me up so well, right, with my introduction and what we're going to talk about. I am a very proud mixed race, mixed class woman of color that gets to do work with lots of organizations and institutions. And as you know me, I believe that oftentimes I'm described as sitting in my heart. That's, I believe, what brings me here was your ask, was relationship. What's sitting on my soul is love. Thank you, Jasmine, as well as, healing and nature and being in a pandemic and holding multiple truths. So that is how I enter this space right now. Even entering the space of this morning, I took a run and I thought for a while, what do I wear in this space? Like, what's professional enough? And Eileen, thank you for bringing that up. And what's proper enough? And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put on this sleeveless shirt and show some tattoos, because that's what also brings me here, to show up counter to how all of that should show up. Right. So that's a little bit of me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I've been thinking about the last two conversations and thinking about what it means to humanize, to function as malware within the standard dominant algorithms of the university. And as Eileen talked about, as Jasmine talked about, the practice of radical self-compassion, right? And extending love. I'm thinking about that those can function as a both and, but they're not necessarily just endpoints. There's the how we get to the endpoint as well. And so that makes me think about process. So I'd love to hear you talk a bit about process and how you ground, because it's really easy, right? In higher ed, we're always rushing to the conclusion, to the product, right? We rush to the product and we're not really conscious about how we're getting there. So how do you ground yourself in process as a form of action?
Yeah, slow down. Even as I hear you say, it is getting to an end point, it is fixing, it is finding the solution. I don't disagree that those don't need to be done. And how do we slow down so that, so I'm going to bring it to the individual, right? So like, how do I slow down to grow, right? To be unfinished, to ask for support, to reach out for support. I think for me, being curious is often in the space of, being in process is being curious. Oh, where I'm at right now. What are we talking about right now? What does this mean right now? And I have learned in the last 19 months a lot about being in process. Thank you. This is a gift that the pandemic has given me, right? To pay attention to nature, because nature is always in process. And if we slow down, how do we learn from nature? Because it is doing it right. And process, slowing down, right? Being imperfect, being messy, and that's okay. Finding layers to what the solution or the fix could be, and giving ourselves permission to slow down. That's process for me.
Permission to slow down, right? This is something that Danielle started, the invitation to those of us joining us, right? To slow down and allow yourself to have the space, permission, right? And I guess I want to continue on that line, Becky, about how do we unwrite the scripts that tell us what we have to do, that we have to be on all the time, right? How do we create that space to do that, rewrite it?
Yeah. Rest, joy, healing, relationship with self. As I heard both Eileen and Jasmine talk, I thought, like, what is the relationship with myself to give myself permission? And that is counter right? That is counter to these isms, that's counter to capitalism, right? To white supremacy, like the things that we've been taught, right? And really finding the power and the joy and the liberation that our bodies hold, and being able to like practice and role model and create a different way of being. For me, that is some ways to capture that. And it is, I'm not always good at it. There are people that are on this screen watching that are like, And so that's why I really think, that's why I really support, like our people are important to us, right? We're not doing this process. We're not doing rest and joy and reflection and healing on our own. We are, how am I in community with myself, and how am I in community with other people?
That's great. That's great. My mind is just firing off in like 1,000 different directions. So I'm trying to like pull it in so I can actually form a question. But to continue in this, because I know you as a scholar, as a practitioner, as someone who consults with organizations and people's units in your work. And so I'm thinking about, okay, so how does all of this individual self work, right? Because, and you talked about, part of acknowledging our humanness, right, as Jasmine invites us to do, is about acknowledging and accepting our imperfection, right? That we're not always going to show up the way we would hope to, right? And so just how do we, this is not the question, but I'm thinking, how do we accept our imperfections, right? And extend the acceptance of other people's imperfections. And so this kind of leads me into what's on my mind. It's how do we translate all of this when we work with other people, particularly those of us who are in positions where we work with, where we supervise, where we teach, right? What does all this mean for how we show up in those spaces in relationship with others who are looking to us and have been set up in hierarchy, right? In relationship with?
So I have become just a lover of Adrienne Marine Brown. I've got all their books sitting on my desk right now. Some of them I've read, some of them I need to read. And she does a lot of work, like a lot of movement work. And I pulled out a quote because it just speaks to my soul as we think about individual work and what about within organizations, and got to consider positionality, and there's hierarchy. So there's a lot of factors, right? And so what she says though is see our lives and work and relationships as frontline, a first place where we can practice justice, liberation, and alignment with each other and the planet. And she talks about fractals, right? And so what happens on the small happens on the large. So for me, that even gives me permission that self-work is okay because we say we're not supposed to. And it's selfish and we don't have time and we're not intentional. And there's parallel processes. So how are we showing up in this space of frontline for ourselves so we can role model, so we can talk about it, so we can talk about what's not working, so we can say, let's look at this policy. But I'm clear on how I'm looking at it, right? I'm working within an organizational structure. It's not a flat structure. What does that mean for me? How do I find my leverage points? Jasmine, I really appreciated what is in my locus? How do I realize that this work didn't start with me and this work's not going to end with me? How are we really honest with grad students, right, around organizational structures and what we want to shift in those? So there's a lot that comes to my space around, how do we then interact in organizations? I've been for the last 2 days, I've been full days retreating with facilitating with an organization, and just to slow them down is a challenge. To build relationship, to build in community, to see what's working well within their organization, to talk about power structures, to talk about how identity is showing up. But we couldn't get to that conversation without slowing down and realizing some of those other pieces, which is all of, is a part of the puzzle of the work.
Ooh, I think I have time for one more.
Oh, yes.
Which is, why should we do this in higher ed? That's when we think about, and I study and write about and teach about the history and philosophy of higher ed, right? And when we look at, in real talk, the philosophy and the history underpinning colleges and universities, the practice of higher education in this country, it's not anything we've been talking about today. It's just not that. So, and it's why? So why should we rage against the machine, right? To pull from 80s reference. Why should we rage against the machine here in our work?
Because we need it. But we need healing. Like, we need rest, we need joy, we need liberation, so that we can center humanity. So I get higher education was created in structures for certain folks, and that has shifted. And we are shifting it. Like, we are a tidal wave. Like, how are we bringing this together? Again, nature, right? To develop maybe a different ecosystem, right? So that people can show up in wholeness, so that we can be congruent with the values that we say that we have, right? Like, let's get to some work. And part of that, like that work, like for me, it is, I want organizations to be liberated. Right, to find that liberation, so we can show up messy and imperfect and say we need rest and say we need joy, and look at how our practices need to shift, so we can become congruent with who we say we want to be, as well as congruent with what the world needs. They need these folks on the screen. They need the people that are watching, and we need that for ourselves. So all of those pieces.
Absolutely. It's hard,
It is.
but it's worth it.
Right? It is hard, right? And I ask us to give us some deep breaths and allow ourselves space if we need to get some energy to get back in it. We can't do it all of the time, 24/7.
Exactly. Which brings us back to relationship. Right? We're not here to do it all by ourselves, right? How can we be in relationship with each other to be the wellspring, right? For each other. Yeah, awesome. Woo! All right.
All right.
Thank you so much, Becky. I'm gonna turn it back over. Danielle, one more conversation. Let's go.
Lonnie's gonna bring us home, but there's just so much good stuff here. I hope my notes are going all over the place. Welcome back. Leilani, say hello. Talk to us about how you're sharing your life with others and what is speaking to your soul and bringing you to us today.
Oh my goodness, aloha mai e kako. I come to you as a descendant of the ancient navigators of the Pacific. My ancestral homelands have been illegally occupied. They are unceded, and they are known as Hawaii. I acknowledge my place and space as a visitor on the unceded and occupied homelands of the Northern Paiute, the Southern Paiute, the Western Shoshone, and the Washoe nations. And it's because of their ancestors and their descendants' tireless love and care for this land and the space that Reno, Nevada, and the University of Nevada, Reno exist. Colonization has not only impacted the indigenous peoples of this area, but it's also impacted the enslaved people who were forced to build the surrounding community to ensure that this location has been able to thrive for centuries. And so as a visitor here, each day I ask for permission to enter. I give thanks for being here, and I ask for my ancestors to communicate with the ancestors of this land to ensure that they understand that I understand my place and my space here. And that's really important for me to continue with these types of protocols, to harken back to honor who I am, but also to honor the people that I'm sharing space with. My pronouns are she, her, and I work here at the University of Nevada, Reno. When I think about the ways in which I share myself, a lot of it is sharing stories about my family and relationships. Sometimes I overshare, which I think is funny, and other people are like, that's a lot. Like, why are you telling me about your weirdo family? But that's really important, not only in having people understand who I am, but it's a way for me to talk a little bit about like what's weighing on my soul, what are my values. My grandparents are pivotal in my life. And as a Kanaka Maole who grew up off island, I grew up on the continent in Arizona, being able to have that connection to the Aina, or that which feeds the land, has been very important to me. And my grandmother, even though she taught me from afar, my grandfather taught me from afar, my father taught me about what it meant to be Hawaiian. As a displaced Kanaka, and my white mother taught me what it meant to be Hawaiian as well. And so I've got this very complex understanding of what it means to be Hawaiian. And so building those relationships with other people and also wanting to know their stories is really important, because that's how I build connection, and that's how it's possible for me to better understand who people are. And I reflect on what Jasmine and Eileen and Becky were talking about, like how do we reconnect with the humanity of people, particularly when I have been told and taught that to be professional is really about transaction. We got to get the work done. I think it was DL, I don't remember if it was DL or Becky who was talking about like the end game. It's always about like, rather than process, it's about the product. I'm more interested in like, how do we get there? What is our journey? And going back to the teachings of my grandmother, who was always like, what does it look like, feel like, sound like, be so bold to say like, taste like and smell like, super weird, little creepy, but like, how do we get there? And how do we enact the senses that we have access to? And so when I think about like where I'm at right now, I'm in a place of reflection. I'm in a place of a little bit of grief right now, because some things are happening in my personal life, but also of hope and humbleness, and just being in a place with all these amazing people on this panel, but also with the kindness that's been shown to me today.
Yeah. Thank you, Leilani, for entering into this space like that, and for talking about your grandmother. I always refer back to taste like, smell like, feel like, as I'm trying to process and reground myself. So I'm glad that you shared that. You know, a theme has been a lot about slowing down and about listening. And I know that you and I have talked a lot about how higher ed and the ways in which we're operating right now is all about urgency, all about things that got to get done and things that have to happen, and this fear associated with it, and just thinking about our opportunities to take joy and to create space and to feel and be in relationship. It almost feels like it's in direct tension with what we're being asked to do. And how does that show up for you and for your team and your day to day?
Absolutely. So, you know, I've had to reframe some of the work. You know, I serve as the Dean of Students, and as I engage in this work, the framework that I've started to talk with the team about is someone dying? Are their basic needs being met? Are they in jail? Which sounds really weird, but like trying to get like where is this urgency coming from? And are there ways for us to, is it truly urgent? Is it an emergency? Or is there this frantic need to just get something done? Is someone speaking from a list of demands? And so is it this place of frenetic energy, or is someone really going to be harmed if we don't get something done right now? And that is the framework that we're starting to utilize to say, will someone or something cause harm, or someone or something be harmed if we don't act right now? Or can we pause, take that breath, and make decisions with everyone who needs to be in the space, in the room, and not from a place of fear? Because I think that there is a lot of power in that place of pause and this place of this sense of urgency that doesn't necessarily do us any good when we're making decisions from we need to do this right now. Do we really? If we do, let's do it. If we do not, I think that urgency can be manufactured. And it really does come from this construction of white supremacy, my opinion. I've read about it. There's an article about it. I believe in it. But it comes from this place of power and an assertion of power that I'm going to tell you that I need this right now because that's what I want. But it's not really urgent. I'll use this case of reports. Do you really need that report right now, or is it going to sit on your desk or be shelved?
Well, and I love how you frame that. You talk about it as a list of demands. And so often in higher ed, a list of demands is, right, our students saying that they need something or wanting something and trying to think about a response, but flipping it. And the structures and the systems also put lists of demands on us, right? And because of the power dynamics, we don't always get to think about them in that way, or to be able, someone was speaking earlier about what do we push back on,
Right,
to center our humanity and to be radical in our spaces of love, to make good decisions and to think about what's really going to benefit others from a place that is not fear, but is care and compassion.
Absolutely. And for me, I have to start thinking about what are we sacrificing from urgency? So if this has to be done so urgently, at what cost? And that becomes it feels very capitalistic, because it is, but are we losing people? Are we losing care? Are we losing love? Are we losing compassion at the benefit of this urgency? Are we leaving important people out of decision making because we have to get this done right now? And is that worth it? Can we slow it down? Even 5 minutes, even 10 minutes? Can we make that important phone call to call someone into a meeting? And I think, I always think about like the urgency is at a loss of relationships. My grandmother would always tell me, aloha's not just about love. Like when they say like, oh, it's about aloha, like love, hello, goodbye. But really when we break it down, aloha is about sharing of breath. And aloha, when we say aloha and we go into honi, which is to give someone a kiss, right? So you'll see a lot of people, they'll be aloha and then they kiss on both cheeks, right? It's a sharing of the breath, and it's sharing a breath of life. So when I say aloha to you, I'm sharing my life breath with you, and you share your life breath with me. Because without you, I cannot survive. And without me, you cannot survive. So it's that reciprocity. And in Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and Teachings, there's this excerpt that says, each person, human or no, is bound to every other in reciprocal relationship. And I'm like, that really speaks to me. Just as all beings have a duty to me, I have a duty to them. If an animal gives its life to feed me, I am in turn bound to support its life. If receive a stream's gift of pure water, then I'm responsible for returning a gift in kind. An integral part of a human's education is to know those duties and how to perform them. And so that relationship goes back to, I believe Becky was talking about how we learn from nature, but the ways in which we not only interact with our environment, like each other, but it's also with our environment. So when I'm thinking about this urgency, what am I losing? And what are the ways in which I can cause harm, but I can also benefit and give back in really important ways? And when I think about urgency, can I, as Eileen was talking about, be that malware and disrupt these notions of like, it's professional to be transactional. No, it's also professional to center humanity and build relationships, to say we can be caring and compassionate and kind and still be very strong and powerful and advocate. And when DL said, like, why should we do this? Because the machine that was built in the 1800s is not meeting the needs of our scholars of today.
Well,
So when DL asked that question, I was like, because it's broken, that's why. Or it's not relevant for today. Mm-hmm. It wasn't built for Indigenous people like me, like my ancestors. My grandfather survived missionary schools. Yesterday was Orange Shirt Day, which is a recognition of people who survived residential schools. And that was a really powerful day for people in my family and across the United States and Canada. But we also know that the university was also built, there were universities that were built to destroy the savage and save the man. Those schools of then are not the schools of today. And that's why a lot of us do this work. Not all of us. But when we talk about land acknowledgements, that's some of the work that's one of the reasons why we can say that we do this work as part of reconciliation.
Absolutely. And do it together, right? So in your reading, it's about nature comes together. Becky talked about emergent strategy and the ways that watching animals, it's all about coming together and sharing, which then requires taking a break, taking a breath, building the relationship, and doing things in community that will dismantle the structure, that will be the malware, as we're all kind of interconnected in trying to kind of create and push forward and say that we're imagining different spaces.
Absolutely. And where the hard work and the heart work comes in is it's about decentering the I and recentering the we. And in my training throughout undergrad, school, K through 12, undergrad, it's always been about like I, independence. And in my community, it's always been about we, like collectivist. So the tension has always been there. And how do I navigate those, like the teachings of my elders and the teachings of the academy? And so I think that that's where that really hard work and that heart work comes in. And how do we navigate like our own trauma that we've experienced and not take on other people's trauma as our own, and engage in really good self-care for the healing, and tell people it's okay that we should be engaging in healthy self-care and be compassionate to ourselves and not be jerks to ourselves, so that we can be healthy enough to take care of someone else. And I've learned, I've read this book called Trauma Stewardship, which has been very pivotal for me in that, it's easier to take on other people's trauma, take care of that trauma rather than to take on my own. And so how do I disrupt some of those messages that I've been trained about as well? And that's some of my own inner work that I need to continue to do, but then also how do I support the team that I'm supervising in doing that work as well?
And the patterns.
The pattern. Right.
if we're in relationship with each other, then we have to be centering love, which means we have to love ourselves and others in order to do that work and to take care of ourselves and to push and to nudge in those spaces of trauma. It's the centering of the humans
Absolutely.
over whatever is coming before us.
Absolutely. So it goes back to, I think, what Becky and DL were talking about. It's about process. For me, it's about that journey. Yes, the outcome is great. We need an outcome, but rushing that process is not, to me, it cannot rush the process. Cannot be like, well, I'm just going to take my time because, maybe we need to, but we need
There's
to
a
get
balance.
through it. But how do we not rush through that process? So it's about the outcome. How do I work through that and work through that in relationship? So it's the we, it's not an I, so I can say that it's all about me, and care for myself, care for community, care for others, and really use the philosophy of the community where I come from, where it's Malama Aina, and Aina means that which feeds. So if we Malama Aina, if we care for that which feeds will care for community will care for Ohana, which is family will care for the individual will Malama Aina, right? So it's reciprocal and it's cyclical. So a lot of it goes back to how I was raised and the values of my family. So that goes back to how do I show up and the ways in which I try to connect with people.
And how important listening to those stories are, to be in relationship, to show up in love, and then to try to move through those things as a collective. Thank you so much for wrapping us up and leaving us with so much to think about and connecting things along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our amazing panelists. Over the next about 17 minutes or so, we want to invite you all to slow down a little bit because there's been just a wealth of information shared. We have been here for about an hour and 13 minutes, so want you to first listen to your body and get some fresh air or whatever you may need to do. And then, as Leilani was just talking about, doing a little bit of heart work. So in the guide that you are all provided, I'll share it in the chat in a second as well. Each panelist has shared some kind of guiding questions for you all to reflect on, to engage with, that you all may want to engage with, or this may be a time for yourself to do some journaling and self-reflection. So we'll regroup at about 30 after the hour. So I'm in Pacific time, so for me, that'll be 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. In the meantime, our panelists are gonna have a conversation and kind of prepare for their closing session, which will start at 30 minutes after, go for about 20-25 minutes. And then they will, DL and Danielle will wrap us up. So for about the next 16 minutes now, we'll allow you all some time to slow down, listen to your body, listen to your heart, and we'll regroup at about 30 after the hour. All right, welcome back, everybody. Our panelists are still coming back in, and I will turn it over to Danielle and DL and our wonderful panelists to lead this next section.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you've had some time to reflect. That was 75 minutes went very quickly. And the panelists, I think all of our panelists can come back on screen too, if you're here. There were just some things we kept circling back to and wanted to continue to engage in some conversation. Invite you to put some questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to those. But one of the things that I noticed in a few of our conversations was about, the permission, the taking off the cape, like this notion of the empowerment that we have, the power that we have in ourselves to heal, to show love, to show up differently. And we just love to kind of toss that out as a beginning piece to our panelists to bring in some of your additional expertise. What does that mean? And how can we support the folks that are on the call and joining us of taking up space and having love and centering love and being themselves and centering humanity in our work?
I think we're all trying to decide who's gonna take the leap. So, I guess what I'm thinking about is kind of going back to something that I mentioned earlier, and this is connected. I saw that question that came up in the Q&A too about like how can graduate students with less positional power like press the slow down button, and so I think what I'm going to say is connected to that in some ways. But what I'm thinking about are decisions and how we make decisions and thinking about what's behind our decisions, and that seems maybe not as connected, but I'm just thinking about this moment I had when I was, which is similar to what Becky was talking about earlier about what she was gonna wear today. I was trying to decide what I was gonna wear for my dissertation defense years ago. And I was thinking like, I wanna be taken seriously. I wanna be a professional. I want to seem like an academician, all of this stuff. And I remember saying to myself like, no, actually, I want to feel like my best self. I want to feel like my favorite self, actually. And so I went through my closet and I picked out the dress because I like dresses. I picked out the dress that felt most like me, that brought me the most joy, that I felt like was my easiest smile. And I think it was in that moment that for me, I realized that the decisions I make to show up as my authentic self are connected to, I think, creating capacity for us to reimagine what it means to be professionals, for us to reimagine how we show up at work. Similarly, thinking about the ink on Becky's arms, I have tattoos on my wrist that I wear, and I got them recently, and I put them on my wrist on purpose, right? So there wasn't a desire for them to be hidden. And so I go back to those moments where you are making decisions to be authentic. And when you make those decisions to be authentic and you show up in these spaces as your favorite self, as your truest self, even on your worst days, right? Like you're not going to be your best self every single time, but the self that you have, that you show up as that person, I think when you do that, you create capacity for others to do the same. And the next thing you know, more and more and more people are doing it. Right? Or you're giving advice. So now I'm in a position where I'm giving advice to graduate students who are preparing for defenses. And I'm telling them the same thing. Like, I think you should wear whatever you feel best in, right? Whatever you feel proudest in, whatever you feel most Sierra in. That's someone who just defended her proposal yesterday successfully. So I'm thinking about the decisions that we make and how we have to be rooted and grounded in who we are and the love of our own selves and our desire to be authentic. I think that's how we actually create capacity to kind of shift into this new realm where we're rooted and grounded in love.
Yeah, and I think we absolutely need that shift because there's so many times that I think we've probably have all experienced where we're being our authentic self and the word professionalization is brought up to silence us, to diminish us. And this idea that you have to be more resilient. You know what? I'm freaking tired of having to be resilient. In the same way that I don't think that we need to be having these resiliency programs for students, because who are they aimed at, right? It's always the people that have already had to be resilient in a multitude of ways. How do we do that shift while being able to be ourselves authentically and thrive and not hear these messages of you're not fitting that professional mold?
Yes, yes, yes. You can't see me. Yes, 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 yes to Jasmine, yes to Eileen. Yeah, I think that the word professionalism has been weaponized in so many different ways. And as Jasmine was talking about, like how do we feel like our best selves for that moment in time? What is that? How do we present that selves for no one but ourselves? And maybe for like someone if you want to, but really centering yourself in the equation. And knowing it's for me, when I think about it, it's like my best self for that snapshot in time, because my best self, as I think Jasmine, you said this, like it's at that moment, because my best self tomorrow will not necessarily be my best self for today, because it shifts and shapes depending on what's happening in my life. And knowing, as Eileen said, that professionalism can be weaponized, and it has been weaponized in many different ways. I saw this in the chat because it's a tool of white supremacy, and it's a way in which, at least in my own experience, I have been told, like, you don't look professional enough, and so that has shut many doors. Your hair is not professional enough. You don't wear makeup. You wear too much makeup. The clothes are too colorful. So it's been a way to box me in or to pull me away from my cultural roots. And it's pulled me away from more of a place of self-loathing, or pulled me into more of a place of self-loathing than self-love. And so that place of like, why do I care so much? And where is that place of fear coming from? And so the question that I've had to start asking myself when we're talking about, as a graduate student, but then also as I've gone into my professionalism, my professional self, is what am I so afraid of? Where is the fear coming from? What is the source of fear? Because that's an important question that I think a lot of us either don't know to ask or don't want to ask and explore. And start to interrogate that. What is preventing us from loving ourselves as ourselves, but also preventing ourselves from loving ourselves as professionals, loving our professional selves? What prevents that? But also what do we love about our professional selves? Not our profession, but what do we love about our professional selves? I think that's something that I didn't start thinking about until a couple of years ago. And I still think about it every day.
Well, and I want to just like, let's shake up what professional is. So lately I've been like, those are blue collar professionals and they got skills and competency and right. And so how do we even reframe, right, or redesign so that one, we're being like inclusive and equitable and seeing like there are professionals hard at work that are like planting trees and taking care of our campuses so that like the toilets work and the like all of that stuff. And so how do we even be like, bam, you know what, let's shake this shit up. All right, let's really think about what professional means. And that's how we can do this redesign. And then as I'm hearing folks, it's like, okay, so what sits in my body around joy or love or professional or community? This pandemic has invited me to pay so much more attention to my body and what lives in it, right? And what powers it and what needs to heal, so that I can be like, let's shake professional. Let me get into some, like Jasmine, some self-love, right? Not like surface stuff, but like the deep rooted that helps us grow. And I have a love-hate relationship with resiliency, right? And I think nature, right? And so like trees have this resiliency to wind because they're like shifting and moving and so that's when I love resiliency. I don't love resiliency when there's the trauma that's associated with it, right? So really being able to hold the both and with that, because I'm like, and so that's what's coming into my space as I'm hearing all of this brilliance on the screen.
So I want to, so in our little back room chat, we were talking about, you raised the point that all of the 4 panelists today are women of color. And so there was a question that was dropped in the Q&A that I want to raise around the balance between needing to be the twice as good person of color, which I remember my mother telling me that when I was younger, right? Twice as smart, work twice as hard, all of this kind of stuff, the burden of carrying that, as opposed to what we're kind of arguing for today in our conversation around actually being myself, right? Getting grounded in who you are so that you can work with and alongside others so that we can reimagine a new reality. And so I guess just posing that to you all and to us, like, how do we think about how we shift from being this twice as good, that narrative that has been maybe taught to us out of protection, out of survival? How do we shift that into a narrative of thriving and being grounded and rooted?
You know, earlier I talked about the mirror inside ourselves. And this question, I honestly don't even know how to answer, because it's this self-talk that I have with myself constantly. And I constantly feel like I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough. I always feel like I'm not at my best capacity. I'm giving my C work, and I don't have that answer. I don't have an answer to that question, but I think it's important to state the self-talk that perpetuates that.
Yeah, for sure. There's internal discourse. Yeah, go ahead, Leilani.
Oh, go ahead. I can after you, Jasmine.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, yeah, I agree that there's an internal discourse. And I think for me, what has worked is that actually when I feel like I am being grounded in Jasmine, that's actually when I do my best work, to be honest. So I think when I reframe it, for me, it's kind of like when I reframe it in that way, like it's not about being twice as good. It's about being more and more me. And then the more and more me I become, the better I actually am at my work, the better I actually am at my job, the better I show up because I feel like myself, as opposed to like, I feel like I'm existing in a costume. When I have to put on a mask, a costume, wear a mask. We're still in COVID, so I don't mean that kind of mask. When I have to put on a costume, I feel less capable, to be frank. And so I think when I put on that green dress to defend my dissertation, I felt more myself than I ever did during my dissertation process. And I felt like I did such a great job because of that. And so I think it's really about, Becky mentioned in our backroom chat about healing, right? And so like, what is the healing that's required to navigate the self-talk, to navigate the internal dissonance, to navigate how a series of protection around yourself, because there's other people who are going to be telling you stuff all the time. It's not always just self-talk. It's like other stupid people too. And so how do we create boundaries around our heart, right? So that we can filter those messages as well.
Jasmine, I really appreciate what you've shared, like what you've shared around like the boundaries, but then also like in grounding your brain and your mind around like what you need in order to be able to work through it, right? It's not about getting over it, but it's about working through it and with it. For me, like I'm my worst enemy. So similar to Eileen, like that self-talk is real. I am my own worst enemy. I don't give myself grace. I will give everyone else grace. I'll talk like, be nice to yourself. I'm a jerk to myself, but be nice to yourselves. What I've realized is that when I hearken back to what my grandparents taught me about centering community rather than like putting my ego first, when my ego comes first, that's when I start to think like I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough, it's not enough, I will never be enough. When I start recentering community and the legacy of 7 generations, I do better. Because it's not about me anymore. It's about how do I be a better ancestor for those who will come after me and continue the legacy of those who came before me. It's not about me anymore. And I have to remember that in my mind and in my heart and in my blood and in my spirit. And so that grounds me in a different way. And that memory, I'm like, oh, okay, so that talk is powerful for me. And it takes the ego out because it's not about like other people's judgment about how I'm performing. It's what am I doing to make my environment better for those who are coming along, so I can resituate. But when it's like, I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing this, then I'm a hot mess. And I'm starting to realize, I've started to realize when other people are telling me what I'm not doing well, or when I'm telling myself that I'm not enough, I have to recenter the voices as to, is that the ancestors talking, or is that you or someone else giving you those messages? And am I giving myself grace?
And all of this requires vulnerability, right? And that's another thing about this professionalization, that it seemingly doesn't make room for that. And if we don't make space to be vulnerable, how can we recreate more healing spaces where we can continue to do the work and sustain ourselves instead of like dragging ourselves to the ground until we've broken ourselves because we've been so used to that sense of urgency, right? Like, and that's something that we need to reintroduce, like vulnerability, and not always appearing or feeling this pressure to not show when you've made mistakes, or to say, this is what I'm telling myself today. And by stating that out loud, hopefully you can remind me, you know what? No, because I do need those reminders.
Eileen, I was about to jump on and say vulnerability, and like, and vulnerability is like, again, humanity, like it is a part of that, but we've been socialized and taught to be so distant from our own humanity. So as even you said, vulnerability, what popped into my space was, and how am I vulnerable with myself? Right? How am I vulnerable with myself and in my story and in my experiences, and when I've like been brilliant and when I've like, ooh, that was a mess up. Right? And how do I give how do I give the finger to this enoughness? Like, don't got time for you. Like I'm not allowing you to be in my space. And that takes like work and intentionality and permission and nurturing. Leilani, I appreciate you about generations. I often think, right, and feel how is this going to impact? Like what path am I doing, right? How am I mimicking nature? Because those trees continue to grow, right? Spring flowers continue to come up. And how, how am I letting my humanness, i.e. vulnerability, like how am I allowing humanness into space and role modeling that in a meeting, in a training, right? In my writing, when I go to the grocery store, like all of those things, like how are we allowing humanness to show up so that we can reimagine this space.
I also am thinking about, so we all have jobs, right? We're not graduate students anymore. And so I do recognize that there is a level of, right, like power that we have. There are some concerns that we don't have to navigate in regard to, especially the graduate students who are on the call. And so I guess I just want to acknowledge that there are sometimes risks, right, involved in being your true and authentic self. In environments and within systems that are not designed for you to be you. They're designed for you to assimilate, to become whatever it is that they want. And so I guess I just wanted to create space to also acknowledge that and to not pretend as if it is easy. Right, like these are intentional decisions that you have to make, and I think that you do have to consider and weigh the cost and the risk along the way. But I think it's important to also think about at some point at what cost as well, right? Like at some point at what to what degree are you costing your own self when you are existing in spaces where you can't be yourself, where you can't be rooted in love, when you can't be grounded in vulnerability and honesty and care and all of those things. As a social worker, I think about all the time in my MSW program, they used to say, you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. Like if you're not well, you can't take care of business, is what they used to say. And so similarly, like as long as we are kind of giving in to the systems that exist around us, then we can't create space for other people to resist those systems as well, right? And so, but when we do make the decision to show up, I'm thinking of, I can't remember who said it, but your existence is the resistance. So when we do make decisions to show up as our true and authentic selves with our tats or with whatever, right? Like that actually creates and cultivates capacity for other people to do the exact same thing. And so we have to do it more and more and more and more. We have to talk about love more and more and more and more, even if the word makes people uncomfortable, right? We have to bring it into every conversation to the degree that we can until it is normal. That's how we create a new reality, right?
And we've got to be in practice of it. Right? Like, let's practice it, let's embody it, let's role model it, and how do we, and then change happens.
Wow, this has been so awesome. We are getting almost at time to conclude this iteration of this conversation, right? But we hope that each of you continue this discussion, and you take what's in the workbook, you continue to work with it, that you take it to those that you who were not able to come today, and you pass it on, right, as you engage others. I do think it's really, really important to specifically lift out and make really explicit that these pressures around dress and professional dress are specifically used to weaponize against women, particularly women of color and trans women and femmes, right? And so I think about Dean Spade's work, Be Professional, with the exclamation point. You can Google it and it comes up. It's openly accessible on Dean's website on it. And that needs to be really particularly recognized, right? And I really appreciate, Jasmine, you looping back around to grad students and their role in all this. As someone who teaches grad students and has this conversation all the time with them, one of the things that I think is also important is to carry, who are you with, right? Who are you in community with? And sometimes and often, who are you in community with outside of higher education, outside of your grad program, outside of your assistantship site that can remind you of who the hell you are and how to stay grounded in that space, right? And you keep coming back to those folks into that community, you know, even as you might have to engage and perform in certain ways in order to navigate, right, where you are right now as a graduate student, right? So thank you so much. This is amazing. Danielle, do you have any last words? All right.
Just capture it in love, make decisions in love, not in fear, right? And don't be afraid to breathe because the work will get done.
Absolutely.
Taking time for yourself is not going to make the work not get done. It just might mean that when you present and go into work, you're more fuller version of yourself to do it. And so challenge those notions and focus on love as you go through this weekend and your work and your studies. And just thanks so much to this panel. What brilliant.
Thank you so much. Jason and Trisha?
Yes, Danielle, DL, Jasmine, Leilani, Becky, Eileen. I'm going to say thank you, but I know in our rehearsal, I said, don't open the chat. You don't have to pay attention to it. Pay attention to the question and answer. I want all of you to open the chat right now and see the love that is being poured into you for everything you have shared over these past 2 hours. And I just want you to read those messages and sit with that. And just as appreciation for myself and Trisha, but every attendee who's here today. To our attendees, I want to remind you that the recording of this will be available within the next week or so. And if you haven't already, we just want to do some shameless plugs. We want to remind you that ASHE and ACPA have other events coming up. For ASHE, our general conference is coming up in November, which will be both in person in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we will also have a virtual ticket option. And Trisha, I'll talk a little bit about ACPA, which I'm excited to attend in March in St. Louis.
Yes, and the ACPA annual convention will be March 6th to 9th in St. Louis, Missouri. Registration is open for both ASHE and ACPA, and we hope that you can join us to continue these conversations there. Thank you again for joining us today, and we are wishing you all the best as we continue to navigate this time together. Have a great afternoon.